A very good evening to you. We acknowledge that this cathedral sits on the ancestral territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, and we do so in the spirit of ongoing reconciliation and truth-telling. Welcome to Christ Church Cathedral. My name is Donald Hunt, and I'm the Director of Music here. For a complete list of our up-to-date COVID protocols, please have a look inside your program. I wish to just draw your attention to the continued requirement to wear a mask indoors, maintain physical distance, and not to dwell in the building after the concert is over, please. Concerts continue all summer long here at the Cathedral, and in August, we're delighted to present several events in partnership with the Pacific Baroque Series, and as well as the Victoria Summer Music Festival. For more information and for tickets, please see our website. And I think there's also a listing of all of those events on the back of your program. Tomorrow at 4 p.m., our very own choral and organ scholars here at the Cathedral will be presenting a variety concert featuring diverse repertoire spanning Hildegard von Bingen, madrigals, Brahms, and show tunes. That's part of our ongoing summer recital series every Saturday here. Entry for those concerts is by donation. As the weekend temperatures rise, I think you'll find that coming to the Cathedral can provide you with some welcome refreshment. So I do hope that I see some of you here tomorrow at 4 p.m. We're very fortunate to have developed a partnership with the Emily Carr String Quartet and are delighted to once again welcome them for this 6th installment in their presentation of Beethoven's complete quartets. To tell us a little bit more about this wonderful music, please would you now welcome Robert Holliston.
Thank you, Donald. Hello, everybody, and good evening, and welcome to the 6th installment of the complete Beethoven String Quartets. I have a little personal history with this first selection on tonight's program. Many years ago, when I was like 17, that's decades ago, I was listening primarily to the violin concerto of Beethoven and decided to become a bit more adventurous and start listening to the string quartets. And this was the first one, Opus 18, number 4 in C minor. And it made a terrific impression on me. I thought it was the most wonderful piece. I listened to it over and over and over again. And then years later bought a book devoted to a study and discussion of the Beethoven string quartets by Joseph Kerman. And imagine my horror when I found out that, in his opinion, mostly because so much of the material he assumed in this quartet came from Beethoven's early years when he was still living in Bonn, because of that, this was distinguished only by being a very weak quartet and sort of unworthy of belonging to the rest of the canon. And when you read a learned person's dissertation about something like that, it does have a deflating way of making you feel that perhaps you've erred in taste. So I did a little bit of digging around. I wanted to share that with you, just in case you've read this book or are tempted to buy it, to dissuade you from doing so. And one of the wonderful ways of putting this I encountered was from somebody who pointed out that as Beethoven lovers in the 21st century, we really cannot help but listen to early Beethoven through the prism of people who are familiar with the Archduke Trio or Fidelio, or for that matter, the Razumovsky quartets, works that belong to a later era in Beethoven's continued evolution. And the temptation is to look at the early works as essentially Beethoven establishing himself and absorbing the styles of Haydn and Mozart. I've mentioned this before, if you've come to these concerts when the Emily Carr String Quartet has played Opus 18, because in actual fact, really, the early works of Beethoven are so intently his own, as maybe we'll discuss in a little while. But this person came to the conclusion that because of these somewhat superficial assessments we make of early Beethoven, that early Beethoven, in his opinion, is one of the most underrated composers in Western history. We don't listen to it closely enough for itself, and we allow ourselves to ignore some of the deeply personal and uniquely Beethovenian qualities that the works have. And another book, which I think was, it encouraged me not to feel so suppressed by the weight of knowledge that Joseph Kerman had displayed in his tome, points out that there are no sketches for this work. That probably leads people to think that Beethoven worked on it earlier in Bonn. But as a matter of fact, there are no sketches for the septet Opus 7 or Opus 20 or for the First Symphony either. Almost nothing has survived. And we know that Beethoven fanatically kept sketchbooks and also worked through his ideas obsessively. And the fact that we don't have sketches for these works, which are all published around the same time, should lead us to believe that one of the books was lost. And we know that they were treated very casually after Beethoven's death. And so the likelihood is that we don't have material that can introduce us to Beethoven's process with this quartet simply because it has been lost. So the piece is almost certainly a contemporary of those other works and the other ones that are in this. And to further vindicate our love for this quartet, it is the first in the second publication of Opus 18. I should mention that the publishers issued this set of 6 in 2 groups of 3, and Beethoven chose the order. And this one is the first one in set 2, which was published in October of 1801. So that shows us how much he thought of it. And almost as an additional vindication, musicians have always loved playing this piece. Audiences have always loved listening to it. And its key is somewhat significant, C minor. We are kind of encouraged to think of C minor as the Beethoven key, the one, of course, that he reserved for the C minor symphony, the key that he reserves for his most turbulent kinds of utterances, with the ones with the most violent kinds of contrasts. And again, there's an element of truth to that. Composers are drawn to certain keys for certain reasons. Personally, I feel that we shouldn't ignore the fact that there are passionate utterances and contrasts in the so-called Appassionata Sonata, which is in F minor. And there are equally dramatic contrasts in the Piano Sonata in D minor, nicknamed the Tempest. So Beethoven has feelings for these different keys. He's drawn to them for certain reasons, but as somebody pointed out, he may have a kind of primal energy when he turns to C minor, but it never leads to the same mood twice. This is the 5th work that Beethoven published in C minor. And this would include a piano trio, a string trio, and 2 piano sonatas. So he's very comfortable with C minor, and this has elements of that key's drama for him. So I'll just run by the 4 movements that you're going to hear. The opening of the first movement essentially is a 12-bar phrase with a fantastic sense of forward thrust, and something that someone asked, is this true of Mozart? Is this true of Haydn? That Beethoven knows from the first note exactly where that phrase is going to go. His architectural plan was so unerring, even as early as Opus 18, even as early as Opus 1, that when we hear that first note, we are comfortable with him bringing us through that long phrase. And it has a forward propulsion, but it's tempered. If you'll notice that the tempo marking isn't allegro con brio or allegro spirito, it's allegro ma non tanto, which means lively, but not too much. He wants a sense of being held back. And we hear that right in the very first opening, when you'll hear a melody, da ya ba da 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 dum, and almost immediately you'll begin hearing offbeat chords, ya ya, as if he's making sure that the 2nd and 4th beats keep the work from catapulting itself over those beats too much. The cellist for the Lafayette Quartet put it beautifully. With Mozart, we just sail over the beats. With Beethoven, they offer a bit of resistance, and this quartet definitely gives that feeling. Now, the slow movement remains in C major, so the tonic of C is common to all 4 movements of this piece. And it has an interesting tempo marking itself, andante scherzoso quasi allegretto, which means moving forward with a lightly humorous quality. But listen to the way that there are contrapuntal elements in this movement. It has a wonderful lightheartedness, but it's very learned. We're told that we should think of Beethoven exploring fugues and counterpoint only later in his career. But here it is, Opus 18, and it's there. Listen in the minuetto for surprising syncopations, and you'll hear them again when we get to Opus 59, number 3 as well, and the wonderful way in which the main theme is varied throughout the entire last movement. Now, so many of Beethoven's hallmarks are present in this piece. The wide, dramatic dynamic range, the exciting offbeat accents, the sforzandos in which a chord is meant to be played with force, The amazing range when you just watch Muguet when she's playing all the way up the fingerboard and then plunges down to a low note. All of these things are here and accounted for. Do you all know the term subito piano? Do you want me to tell you? Okay. Then you can go asking people at the bus stop, hey, do you know what subito piano means? It just basically means you get louder. It's a crescendo effect, and it gets louder, and it builds, and then there's subito means immediately or suddenly, and Beethoven loves that effect, and here it is in this as well. All of it giving us the most incredibly terrific thrill. I'm going to quote this famous pronouncement by Goethe that was made late in Goethe's life. Goethe died in 1832, so he lived longer than Beethoven. The string quartet is the most comprehensible genre of instrumental music. One heard four intelligent people conversing with one another, believes one might learn something from their discourse, and recognize the special characteristics of their instruments. Four intelligent people conversing with one another. This is what you're about to hear, even if some of the conversation can get a bit heated. So there's no need for me to tell you this, but please enjoy this performance of Opus 18, number 4 in C minor. Thank you. What a sensational, fantastic, exciting piece. And now we're moving to Opus 59, published in 1808. And between the two of these sets of quartets, we have two of the most frequently frequent dedicatees of Beethoven's works. Opus 18 dedicated to Lobkowitz, and Opus 59 dedicated to Prince Andrei Razumovsky, obviously a Russian name. He commissioned them and was dedicated to them, and he wanted Beethoven to include Russian-sounding material in these quartets. The early ones are so groundbreaking that many of Beethoven's expected receptive clientele found them just a little bit too much. This one is probably the most accessible of the three, but that's no reason why we should undervalue its innovation and its complexity. It is interesting also that this may be the time when Beethoven retorted to Razumovsky, and he was quite capable of saying anything he wanted to even his most wealthy patrons, when it was pointed out that these are quite difficult not only to play but to understand and to follow as a listener. He said, well, they're not for you anyway, they're for posterity. He was aware of this. And since this is a prince, I'll tell you the other one he said. I like this one, actually. He said, oh, so what if you're a prince? There are thousands of princes, there's only one Beethoven. Anyway, all of that just to point out that the string quartets in the intervening what was it, 7 years, have become much more complex. The works have become more complex. They are larger. 1808, when this was published, also saw the first performance of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. The Eroica, the largest symphony to date, was also a few years behind him. And the works just are larger in scope, in scale, and in length. And the Razumovsky quartets will be part of this, this newness. Everything makes sense in them, but it's more abstract. The development sections, those sections after the composer has introduced his main ideas, in which he then sort of subjects them to re-examination from all different possible angles, these are much longer. And we're entering a kind of different realm of musical priorities. Modulation, that whole idea of moving from one key to another, will now be more adventurous as well, and will move to keys that don't quite seem to go together. And in this we find Beethoven the master of key relationships, not only the direction of the melody and not only the control and manipulation of tempo, but actually when we hear a chord here, Beethoven will know already what chord is going to be mirrored over here. Now I have a question to ask that I'm just going to get up and show you. I'm sorry if this I'll probably disappear, but I'm wondering if you'd like me to show you what diminished seventh chords are. I'm going to. Because this is one work in which the harmonic kind of plan is anchored by the presence of the three diminished seventh chords that are available in our tonal system, and the diminished seventh chord does not really have an allegiance to any one major or minor key. You see, they don't feel like they're settled into any key. They're just transitional chords. They're very, very useful, I have to admit, in silent movie scores when you're tying people to railroad tracks. They almost always have diminished seventh chords. But in many Beethoven works, that very much defines an element of the harmonic structure. So I wanted to tell you that it's a very important part of this particular work in the first movement. Now, the Razumovsky quartets numbers 1 and 2 were so revolutionary, shall we say, so innovative, that people have often said that this number 3 is somewhat classicized. And history, in its forensic obsession with detail, has indicated that it was very likely Beethoven composed it in a quite quickly, in a short period of time. They found this out because when Beethoven was returning from a visit to Silesia, he was waylaid by a violent rainstorm, and all his manuscripts were in a trunk that was just soaked with the rain. That was the trip he was on when he came home and had that awful kind of typhus, which almost certainly led to his later deafness. But they have analyzed all of the water stains on the paper and determined that he'd only finished 2 movements of Opus 59 number 2 and almost nothing of Opus 59 number 3, so he had precious little time to finish it. This explains why one of the movements is actually something that he had written or at least sketched before. And part of this theory of the classicization is also based on evidence that suggests that Beethoven was studying very closely 2 works by Mozart. The first one is the Dissonance Quartet, which begins, as this one does, with a slow introduction that explores some very, very far-reaching harmonies. It's one of the few times in Mozart's where we actually have a tone cluster. And the other one is the Jupiter Symphony, in the 4th movement of which is a very elaborate double fugue, very quick, very contrapuntal, which is very much like the finale of Opus 59 number 3. I'm just going to give you this quote. I can't resist it. Wait till you get to the last movement of this piece. His most energetic fugato cum sonatiform finale, a virtual perpetuum mobile, a technical tour de force that could not fail and never has failed to arouse excitement. So you can hardly wait to hear that now. So the first movement we'll talk about a little bit. But before that, I want to point out that he may, in fact, have been studying these older works. He did recycle some of his own material, but there are other pieces of evidence available, and one of them I found so intriguing. He was developing for the slow movement, and again, like the first quartet you heard, a slow movement that's not really all that slow. He was developing another one, this one in 2/4 in A minor, that he abandoned, and it showed up 5 years later as the slow movement for the 7th Symphony, one of his most popular slow movements. So he was thinking about new things and new ideas. But as somebody has pointed out, there's also a terrific affinity to the dungeon scene in Fidelio. when the hero Florestan has been kept on a 2-year diet of nothing but water and moldy bread. And we have, again, that column of diminished seventh chords defining our harmony. It doesn't have the same mood, it doesn't have the same orchestration, certainly, but it has that same harmonic idea. And Fidelio is another middle period work, like the Razumovsky. So I find it intriguing that you'll hear some possibility that Beethoven was abandoning the idea of the absolutely new, absolutely mystifying and Russian qualities of 1 and 2, because there isn't really any Russian material in this. But at the same time, thinking forward, the finale is a forward-thinking piece, and the slow movement is a forward-thinking piece. So, when we look at the first movement, it will begin with something like a slow introduction, andante con moto. The first time Beethoven did this, it was in Opus 1, number 2. So sometimes he likes that. We don't just plunge right into the allegro. We have something to settle us down, or at least maybe to cause us to inquire. And then we move to the allegro vivace. And as you listen to that, you're going to hear some very interesting things. A lot of it is for unaccompanied first violin. The others may share in the ideas later, but there's a fair bit of that. And when we get to, I've got something written here that I wanted to share with you. Yes. When we get to the end, this is not that common in first movements of Beethoven. There's a stringendo. A stringendo means to hurry. So it just goes to the end, very excitingly. Now, one thing to listen for, several things to listen for in the allegretto. And again, the second movement is marked andante con moto quasi allegretto. Andante is already a forward-moving tempo. This one, when he modifies it with con moto, he wants it to move even more. And then he just adds in the manner of allegretto, which is the next sort of step up the tempo ladder. So he wants very much to have a forward-moving feeling. Listen to the grounding of the pizzicato in the cello. And again, as I mentioned earlier for Opus 18, number 4, listen for the subito dynamics, which are such a Beethoven hallmark and are present throughout this movement. One thing about the time signature, 6/8, I was looking at the score, and you can see how Beethoven plays with it. A 6/8 is like the Irish washerwoman. That's at its most basic, da 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 da. But Beethoven will allow the melody to go ba 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 ba. So it obscures the natural sort of forward thrust of 6/8. That's where we remember that Beethoven is the master manipulator of time. He can create all sorts of impressions of varied tempos without ever budging in terms of the actual tempo. Now we move to the minuet, which is again a work that Beethoven had already sketched out earlier. It is something that he had been thinking of already. Now, the minuet ends with the marking in the score attacca, which means to go directly without any stopping into the last movement. And the last movement is just a thing of wonder. It is wildly contrapuntal and imitative, and that just simply means that an instrument will begin with a melody, and then the other instruments will copy it, as it were, will answer it. And so fittingly and perfectly, this motive begins with the viola, and then the other instruments come in and imitate it. The viola leads the way. I wanted to try to organize my notes by having them color-coded, and it didn't help me at all. In any case, there are modulations in which keys just sort of are touched on, like a quick tour of a variety of different places. And the contrapuntal techniques are absolutely astounding. There's also developmental techniques, the idea of taking some of the ideas and turning them around. It's like putting your musical ideas in a blender and then taking them out again. All of this leads to the idea that there's a stop. It's like all the players are having to stop to catch their breath, and then a bravado unison finish. So it's one of the most exciting pieces. It has caused a certain amount of consternation because people haven't been able to categorize it neatly enough. But as the great singer Jesse Norman once said, pigeonholes are only comfortable if you're a pigeon. So this work doesn't require any categorization, and I know you'll enjoy it, and I know you'll have a wonderful time whether you're listening to the slow movement or to the bravado finale. Thank you very much, and please welcome Emily Carr String Quartet back to the stage of the Christchurch Cathedral. Thanks again.